Hey everyone, and welcome back to Architecture 5610. So right now I have my little room modeled up and it's not into perspective here. The kind of camera is set up to see it in perspective, but it's not built three-dimensionally in perspective, and that's kind of what we're headed to. So right now, if you have nothing selected and you're just in Rhino, you should probably already be familiar with. If you're looking in the Properties tab here on the right, you can look at camera, and it says lens length is 20 millimeters. It defaults to 50, which would be kind of like a more zoomed in, less perspectival way to see things. You could be at 32, which is a very common and popular like camera lens, like physical real world camera lens size. 18 is another one. I know there's like 70 millimeter lenses are really common, but yeah, I'm at 20, and that kind of seemed to work for my scene and my room as it was laid out. But I would very much suggest that you guys really investigate that, and you would have to kind of play with where you're placing the camera and the target, and then simultaneously edit that lens length and see what looks best. Because inevitably real world cameras are using different lenses. I don't know enough about film to say what's the most common film camera lens length, focal length, but it's something to be thinking about, and compare what you see in your kind of video movie screenshots. So anyway, now that I have this view set up and I'm happy with where the horizon line is kind of lining up between the front and the back, and where the vanishing point is located, and I've got textures mapped, and I'm happy with the level of detail that I have. Now would be the time where you just render what you have here, and then we can move forward to the next step. So I've just got a separate Rhino file open, and here we are. And you can see I'm just in shaded viewport right now, and I've brought in the picture of that rendering, and I've brought in like a more simple version of that where it's just like flat texture, like it's a paint texture. And then you can see this one is just a surface. So you guys are also, you're probably very aware of the idea between like there's a picture command, but then there's also rendered materials, which are often pictures to start off with. So if I go into the rendered viewport, you can see here I have kind of the rendered version of this picture. So it does change things quite a bit, right? Like the background is a lot more white in the one that's a picture. It's a lot less so here. But so now, how do we do the cage edit? How do we kind of apply this to a physical model? So one thing that I want you guys to think about to start off with is the project requirements are the kind of 9:16 aspect ratio with like 4 inches deep for the actual model. So it'll be 16 inches wide, 9 inches tall by 4 inches deep. I highly recommend that your final output, when you build this physical model, end up having a little bit of a margin. I think this one is a bit too much margin, but if you give it at least like a 1/2 inch between where the kind of room or space of the scene is and the outside of that model, it'll just hold together a lot better, and it'll look very convincing. And essentially it's like you're building a picture frame for your model to live inside of. It's really nice. But so then you just have to consider that, like if you want, if this is supposed to be 16 inches, then you just need to think about like, okay, well, am I going to add 2 inches and deliver something that's now 18? Like if I add an inch here, all of a sudden I'm bringing in an 18-inch wide model. Like you probably don't want to do that. I would maybe make this like 1/2 inch at most, and then scale it accordingly. But so this, as I have it modeled, is 26 inches, which is pretty big. But so you can kind of get to this point and then scale the whole thing with just the scale command. Go to 16, there we go, and then you just check what that distance is vertically, and then maybe you'd kind of move the top or bottom faces in. So it's still a bit large. So we'll get to that point. But so kind of this is where we're headed, and this is where we have to start from. But so kind of you can see this is essentially the progress. This is just a duplicate here. Although maybe, am I in rendered viewport, right? Yeah, okay. I'll just delete that. But so, yeah, I mean, this is kind of where we're headed to get to this point. But I think there's an easy way to get here and kind of skipping this step a little bit. So step one would be maybe kind of look at this generally. I'm just going to make a copy of it over here. And I'm going to go to front view. And I'm just here looking at my image. And if I draw a rectangle over kind of like what would be the inside of my relief model, it might help to move this thing to the C-plane. Actually, I'll go a line, horizontal, 0. There we go. So just align that to the C-plane. And I'm going to go to the front view here, and there's my curve that I just drew, and we can see what the size of that is. But so, you know, this should be close to or exactly 16 inches. And if it's not, just scale it to there right now. But so if I was given 15.04, so I'm just going to take this and I'm going to kind of scale it up a little bit that way with the gumball holding shift. And then I'm just selecting the midpoint and this point over here. And I'm looking at the bottom of my screen down to the left to see what that number comes up with. So it would be a little bit over 16 if it's over 8. So I'm just going to type 8, hit enter. I'm going to check it the other way. Here we go. So we're just aiming for 4.5. So that's a little small. Here we go, moving that up. And then what you could also do is kind of select both of these things, type in align, and then click concentric, and it'll kind of get them right on top of each other. But so yeah, we're still kind of, if that's my desired size, then what I ultimately need to do is take this whole thing and just kind of shrink it until my whole scene fits in here. And it would have been better to have copied that original rectangle that I drew. So let's just do that real quick. I'm gonna zoom in real close. And I'm getting into the weeds here, but it's a very fast process once we get going. And I'm just gonna draw a vertical line on this outer one and a horizontal line as well. And I'm gonna select my image, select that curve I just drew, grab the move command, and oh yeah, you want to select that middle one. Where'd my curve go? Okay, here we go. Selecting this, selecting the rectangle. I'm just going to move it to snap with that line that I drew, just so I can get this well centered into this other rectangle. But yeah, so this is going to end up being our kind of target here, and I'm just going to use the trim command and trim the edges of that picture. And then just to give myself some things to object snap to, I'm just going to group these together, and now they're kind of stuck like that. And I think that'll be useful in the next step. So I'm going back to perspective, and I can just go into regular shaded viewport, and I'm just gonna take a look at this model here. And I'm actually, it's easiest to just copy this vertically. I want to save that for later. Easiest to just kind of take this thing and make a copy of it vertically up here. Always make a copy as you kind of progress. It's always good to have like an archive of what you've been doing. But so now I'm going to make a bounding box on this. And this is why we made this image, is I'm going to take this and move it over to the front plane here. And I'm going to select everything except for that group. And so now I can scale my entire model in advance. And actually, I'm realizing I should move, well, let me hide something. Let's think about this more carefully. Okay, so like these parts are not going to be like within the actual model, the Bas Relief model. They're going to be kind of cropped into the outside. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that bounding box, I'm going to scale 1D the bounding box from its midpoint until it meets up with the edge of this whole room here. And I know that, yeah, it's lining up for the top and the bottom, so that's good. But now, yeah, I'm just going to select everything, make sure I'm not selecting anything I don't want. Deselect that little grouped image here, and I'm going to move this by the corner of that bounding box of everything that will be inside the frame of a room. So just reference kind of this concept as you're working forward here. But yeah, so I'm just grabbing what will be inside of the room and I'm placing it here. I'm going to use scale, and I'm going to scale it until it fits inside that bounding box, and like magic, the top of my bounding box is like perfectly aligned with the little rectangle that I drew, or at least it's close enough to perfect that I don't need to care. So I'm actually going to take this group and I'm going to actually, let's just archive this, right? And we'll make a copy over here. And I'm going to actually delete, or not delete, but edit this bounding box. Because the whole thing is that it needs to be 4 inches deep. So what I'm actually going to do, since it needs to be 4 inches deep, but it would be better to have a little bit of thickness like behind the model. So like if you look at this here, you know, this piece of paper that is the back wall, I mean, that works well. I think this works fine. And then essentially this, as you would have to, you know, unroll these surfaces and make these physically. They could just be on that back piece of paper, but potentially you could give yourself an extra 1/4 inch, and then that would let you put something a little bit more rigid on the back. So you could actually end up, maybe you get 2 layers of like 1/8 inch chipboard, and then you take this printed, texturized piece of printed paper that similar to the rocks assignment, you'd like overlay that though onto like a chipboard, and that way you have like a sturdy backing for this, and you can figure out how to hang it. I know in years past, a lot of people, they didn't really think ahead, and then they ended up where, oh my God, how do I actually pin this up? So you need to actually design how this will be pinned. So my advice would be chipboard backing, maybe poke some holes in the chipboard or make some holes in the chipboard with the laser cutter, and that way you can like stick it onto pins from here and here, like it's like some IKEA picture frame or something. Anyway, okay, so back to the task. So the bounding box, I'm gonna scale the bounding box. I think if you guys end up at like 4 1/4 because you add some thickness to the back, that's fine. So I didn't mean to do scale 4D or 3D, I meant to do scale 1D. Here we go, 4, and I'm gonna leave that there. And now I'm actually gonna take this image and I'm going to move it to the way back over here, and maybe even slightly further than that, because ultimately it'll be fine. Okay, so now you want to select your object. You do not need to select, and actually you don't want to select that bounding box. So just make sure you're not selecting the bounding box itself, but you will need that bounding box. So it should be kind of the size of the inner room, and it should be 4 inches deep. And now you'll do the cage edit command. And now it is asking you select the control object, which coincidentally, and it has nothing to do with this bounding box that we already made, but we are going to select bounding box, and it's going to essentially give us like a point grid around the thing that we are selecting to manipulate our object here. So when it gets to this, you just hit world. If it's not defaulted to world, hit world. Next, the X point count, and then the Y and Z, these should all say 2. So it is literally, think of a bounding box. It is, there are 2 corners, you know, as you go in the X direction, 2 corners in the Y direction, 2 corners in the Z direction, from each side. If it was 4, it would be kind of subdividing each face of a box into a grid, and we don't want that. As soon as you change these settings, it will automatically change the X degree and the Y degree and the Z degree. So you can just hit enter from here. Global is my default. If you don't see global right now, hit global. And now we are going to, oh, I just realized actually we need to hide this bounding box, I think. Yeah, actually, I'm going to move the bounding box to this corner here, and that will be fine. Okay, so actually move the bounding box off to the side and select the 4 points that you should end up with that are on the back, kind of floating around your room. And if you see more than 4 points, if there's 3 points along this edge or something like that, or if it's like a whole grid of points, then you missed the X, Y, Z step. But so you want to select all 4 of these corners, and then it's just very easy. So we're actually going to go to the front view, and we've got that image in the background, and that's why we put that there, is so now, and we can be in shaded viewport, I'm going to select the handle on the gumball. I'm going to hold shift, and I'm literally just, with those things selected, I've just shrank the back face of this thing until it aligned with the perspective. And you might find in your specific instance that some of these things that you're dealing with aren't like they're not in the same form of perspective that my example is. You might find that the kind of perspective is looking up somewhat. You might find that it's looking down somewhat. It's all about where that camera and target was placed in reality, in the real world of making a film. But yeah, I just hit Control Z to get me back there. And you just want to make sure that you're holding shift as you're scaling this, and you're not losing the kind of the proportion that you've so carefully designed into this 3D model. But yeah, so that's almost it, and we're almost done. So now I have that bounding box, right? So I need to create this thing at 4 inches deep. So I'm with those 4 points still selected, rather than like eyeballing it with the gumball, which you'll notice if I go back to front view, and it's still the same. And I move it forward, I can go back to front view again, it's still the same, nothing has changed. It's all about that 2-dimensional projection of where these geometries are lining up with, and it's all about that scale. And it has nothing to do with the kind of angle as it recedes into space. But so rather than like sloppily just trying to eyeball this and moving it until I feel like it's 4 inches deep, I'm actually going to type in a line, and I'm going to hit H, and it could have been V because I really always forget whether it's horizontal or vertical. But yeah, so that was the align command. Horizontal center is what the H shortcut takes you to, and then I can just object snap to the corner of that 4-inch deep bounding box, and then we're good. So I guess technically it didn't even need to be a bounding box. You could have just drawn like a 4-inch line from the corner and just made sure that you didn't select it. But it is kind of useful to use the bounding box in the next step, because now I'm actually going to hit escape, and I'm going to just close out of this. And then if you notice that I select this grid here, this like wire grid, that's the cage. I can type in, it might be that you can do solid point on, and then it'll start editing the cage again. But I think you can also just delete the cage. Let's see. Yes. So So there we go. You can just hit escape. You'll see that the dots go away. And now it's like, oh, I can't edit it, but you hit F10 on your keyboard. That brings it back. You can also type in underscore points on. And now, oh, did I just mess myself up? Okay, there we go. Make sure you don't mess yourself up. Hit escape a few times and then just delete that cage. And now this thing is locked into its position. One thing that I didn't mention, and I know this is already at 20 minutes, but these kind of detailed things in the columns, a lot of things like that, you just want to eliminate those. I know like in Blade Runner, things are pretty minimal, so you might not even encounter this. But if you do have fussy little details, just remember, like, go look at that with the distance command and see what the size is. Because at 0.15, I mean, that's not so bad. It's larger than 1/8 of an inch, but not by anything significant. It's like maybe a 32nd larger than 1/8. So ultimately, you'd end up having to fold tiny little 1/8 inch things, and that just seems like a waste of time, especially when the whole entire goal is that we're now going to take this, and we are going to, I'm going to make a copy over here. And we are going to apply my render to it. I don't remember which one is which. We go to assign to objects, and then I will go back over here to properties, go to the texture mapping, apply a planar mapping, and choose vertical. And here we go. Hit enter, and now let's turn on the rendered viewport. And here we go. So you can see that because I don't have a back wall right now, so you do want to get a back wall, and you could put kind of, that was like the whole reason to have, if there's like an opening, and you kind of create like a seamless backdrop, similar to like the thing you guys were using when you took photos. You know, this is just like a nice way to kind of close in the back of an open model. But so, you know, my rendering, like this guy in the wheelchair here, we'd be able to see him if I had a surface in the background. So if we just undo that, do it a few more times, we can actually take this bounding box and maybe also borrow that picture. So we'll move the picture over here by that corner. We'll move the bounding box over here, and now we'll scale up this bounding box in 1 dimension. We'll just do that twice. Let it explode. I'll select the group, hide the group, delete the front face, or not delete, but so what we can do is actually, we can actually hide that for a moment and just kind of look. If we do dupe edge, we can select these edges. I think there's a way that I could have had it do the chain edges. I don't know why I didn't do that. Here we go, select all those, join, type in show, while that's still selected, hit trim, select object and trim, and we'll trim this surface. Was it the right one? I'm not sure. Okay. Here we go. So now we have all of these things, and so I'm gonna momentarily hide that front face, but that's essentially the front face that we'd use. You probably don't want the, you might want to just like apply the texture to the outside like separately, or just as like a color block, like a singular color, or like similar to how I have this paint texture. Like I have this paint texture, like you can just go in here, go to color picker, and you can just look at that RGB value. And you could just kind of build your own color. But so you can like pick one of the colors that are inside with the textures that are in your room, and then use that on the outside frame. But anyway, let's just select all of it, and you can see what it looks like as I apply. Why can't I see this? Okay, we'll go to Assign to Objects, and then we will go over to Properties, Texture Mapping, Apply Planar Mapping, choose Vertical. Here we go, hit Enter, and there we have it. And now we can actually see there's my guy and my plant. And if I go to the front view, go to the one that's done, rendered viewport, there it is. So it's a little off. So I could select all of this, and then you just do the same process that you've already done before, where you're just editing you show the mapping, and then you're using the gumball, and you're scaling this mapping up to get it to match with the geometry in your Relief 3D model. And you can get it pretty close, but doesn't always seem to work. So then you might, maybe you don't always hold shift while you're manipulating it. Maybe you have to do something a little bit more creative to get it to line up just right. But I mean, now, it looks like it's pretty much there. I mean, I don't even mind the outside at all. But in reality, it would be, let me hit escape. I'm just gonna do border, face border. You can just kind of see edges a little bit better right now. Yeah, you can kind of see like what's happening here. There's a few areas where it kind of breaks, but I think that's kind of part of the fun of this. Is kind of going back and forth between kind of the render, the digital, and like the physical, and kind of where they don't quite work as well. But if you can make it where it lines up perfectly, then like good on you. But yeah, I would experiment with it for a little while before you commit to it. But yeah, you should be able to get your characters and things in there. I would confirm with your GAs whether we want to do entourage in the Bas Relief models or not. But okay, yeah, sorry it was a little longer than I wanted it to be, but I think we covered everything pretty quick. So, all right, guys, see ya.